My name is Max, and even now, when I look at my hands, I can still see a faint bluish tint under my fingernails, a permanent reminder of the mark Alaska left on me. My story didn't begin with a heroic impulse. It started with a banal error in judgment, multiplied by human overconfidence that costs lives in the mountains. I had come to the Chugach Range near Anchorage to document the caribou migration. It was supposed to be my grand project for National Geographic, a chance I had been waiting for years. I considered myself experienced. I'd tackled the winter Carpathians, the glaciers of the Alps, and spent weeks in the wilds of Norway. But Alaska is not just a landscape. It is another planet entirely, where a human being is merely incidental biological noise that nature seeks to mute at the first available opportunity. That morning, the thermometer on my rented Jeep read minus 22 degrees Celsius. The air was so dry and sharp, it felt like inhaling crushed glass that scratched your lungs from the inside. The sky was a polished, cloudless blue, creating an illusion of total safety. Captivated by this sterile beauty, I decided to venture a bit further from base camp than I'd planned. I took only a light assault pack, a Hasselblad camera with a heavy lens, a small thermos, and a couple of energy bars. I was certain I'd be back within 4 hours. I didn't even leave a note at camp, a formality I deemed unnecessary for a professional. That was my first fatal mistake. For the first 3 hours, everything was perfect. I walked on a dense crust of snow that held my weight and enjoyed the kind of silence found only in a true Arctic wilderness, a silence so deep you can hear your own pulse in your ears. But in the north, the weather doesn't just change gradually, it reincarnates in a matter of minutes. The first sign was the wind. It didn't come from the side, it dropped from above, pinning me down with its sheer weight. The air thickened instantly, and the sun turned into a dull coin before vanishing altogether behind a white wall. This was a whiteout, a state where snow, sky, and ground become the same color and texture. I lost all sense of the horizon. The world became a white chamber of sensory deprivation, where it was impossible to tell where to take the next step. Even the professional compass in my hand began to act strangely. The needle trembled and spun chaotically. I later learned about the strong magnetic anomalies of this range. I tried to retrace my steps, but they were gone. Fresh snow, fine and sharp as industrial abrasive, filled every track in a heartbeat. I took a step back, trying to find solid ground, and felt the void open beneath my feet. I didn't just fall. I became part of a small avalanche. The slope was too steep, and I tumbled over 100 meters down, bruising my elbows and knees against hidden rocks until a violent impact against a rocky ledge knocked the air from my lungs, along with my hope for a quick return. I lay at the bottom of a narrow canyon, buried in snow up to my neck. When I tried to stand, a pain so sharp pierced my right leg that my vision went dark and my stomach churned with nausea. I realized then, a fracture or a severe ligament tear that rendered my leg dead weight. Either way, I was no longer the hunter of images. I was the prey. Twilight in Alaska arrives inevitably, like a court sentence. The temperature began to drop with terrifying speed, to minus 35. With the wind howling in the canyon like a wounded beast, the perceived temperature was beyond human endurance. At that moment, I knew. I am dying. If I don't do something in the next 20 minutes, the cold will shut my organs down. The brain goes first. It starts making excuses for sleep, painting pictures of comfort. I forced myself to sit up, despite the screaming in my leg that echoed at the base of my skull. My expensive jacket was torn at the shoulder, and I could see the steam from my breath instantly turning to hoarfrost on the fabric. There were no trees, not even a shrub, only bare rock, ice, and death. I began to dig into the snow with my bare hands, tearing my nails to blood against the stones hidden beneath. I was lucky to find a small niche under an overhanging slab of slate. It was too small to stand in, but deep enough to become my final fortress. I cleared the snow from the inside, using my camera as an improvised shovel. My heart bled for the $10,000 piece of equipment, but right now, it was worth no more than a scrap of plastic. Then, I began to build a protective wall at the entrance. I cut blocks with a knife that I miraculously hadn't lost during the fall. My hands had stopped shaking, the most terrifying symptom I remembered from survival courses. It meant my body had exhausted its heating resources and entered core energy-saving mode, effectively shutting down my limbs. I started hitting myself in the face, screaming, cursing the wind to keep the blood moving. When the wall was finished, I left a tiny ventilation hole and crawled inside like a worm into a cocoon. The night became my personal hell. I was a battery discharging in a freezer. Without fire, I was doomed to a slow fade. I took my camera apart to use the leather strap as a splint for my leg. Every piece of gear now served a different, primitive purpose. The energy bar in my pocket had frozen so hard it could break a jaw. I tucked it under my armpit, close to my heart, and waited 30 minutes before it was soft enough to eat. Each sip of ice-cold water caused stomach cramps, but I knew dehydration in the cold is the shortest path to cardiac arrest. Around 2 in the morning, the hallucinations came. Cold is a powerful psychotropic. It shuts down the rational and turns on subconscious fears and desires. It seemed to me that my snow burrow was the cabin of a cozy Vancouver-Anchorage train. I could clearly hear the rhythmic clatter of wheels and the voice of a conductor offering hot tea with lemon. I wanted to stand up, open the door, and step out onto the platform. I had even started to dismantle my protective wall when I caught a sharp, real scent of burning. It was an illusion, but it acted like an electric shock. I stopped. If I went out now, the wind would steal my heat in 5 minutes. I began reciting movie plots aloud, remembering chemical formulas, the names of all my school teachers. I fought for every spark of consciousness, refusing to let my brain sink into the comfortable darkness. To keep from sleeping, I performed isometric exercises, tensing every muscle group to the limit until they began to twitch involuntarily. This provided tiny bursts of heat, but I felt myself weakening with each cycle. My breath froze on the ceiling of my burrow, forming complex crystals of frost. The world shrank to the size of this small snow coffin. I was alone within a 100-mile radius. No one knew my coordinates. No one was coming in a storm like this. My life depended solely on whether I could hold on for another 60 seconds. And then, another 60. When the first gray light filtered through the cracks between the snow blocks, I felt not joy, but a wild, primal fear that it was a cruel trick of my imagination. I began to slowly dismantle the exit. My fingers were black and swollen. They hardly obeyed me, feeling like clumsy wooden splinters I controlled with pure will. When I finally crawled outside, the sky was clear and impossibly cold, like the eyes of a killer. The mountains sparkled in the morning sun, but the beauty was dead and indifferent. I knew if I stayed in the canyon, I wouldn't be found for a year. I had to reach the open ridge. The ascent to the ridge took 6 hours. 6 hours of pure, concentrated agony. I crawled on my elbows and one leg, dragging my injured limb like a heavy, frozen log. Every meter was a one battle. I stopped every few minutes to avoid blacking out from the pain pulsing in every nerve. My breathing was ragged, and there was a persistent metallic taste in my mouth. The frost had damaged the capillaries in my lungs, and I was coughing blood. But I saw the peak. I saw my only ghostly chance at rescue. At the top of the ridge, I played my final card, the mirror lens from my Hasselblad camera. I began catching the sun's rays and directing flashes toward the valley where patrol planes might fly. I did it for hours, frozen in one position, no longer feeling my arm which had gone rigid. Just as the sun began to dip toward the horizon again, and the cold began to return with new force, I was ready to give up. I closed my eyes, preparing for the final sleep. But suddenly I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It was the low, vibrating, life-affirming thrum of Coast Guard helicopter turbines. They spotted my flash from 10 miles away. The lens worked as a perfect beacon. When the chopper hovered over the ridge, kicking up clouds of snow, I couldn't even move from the shock. The rescuer who came down on the hoist later noted that I looked like a block of ice that miraculously still showed faint signs of life. He wrapped his arms around me, and the heat from his body through his flight suit felt like the most powerful sensation of my entire life. After a month in an Anchorage hospital, 3 complex surgeries on my leg, and long therapy for frostbitten fingers, I am learning to walk without help again. Doctors call it a statistical miracle, a survival anomaly. But I know it wasn't a miracle. It was will, pushed to its absolute limit, a refusal to accept the inevitable. Alaska taught me that a person is not their social status, their career, or their expensive gear. A person is what remains in the final tally when everything else is stripped away. Now, when I look at snow-capped peaks, I see no romantic picture for a magazine. I see a mirror reflecting your true essence. In the white silence, there is no room for lies. There is only you, your inner spark, and your minute-by-minute choice to let it fade or to fight until the very last heartbeat. 6 months have passed. Now, I sit on the terrace of a small house on the outskirts of Anchorage. Before my eyes are the mountains once again, but now there is a safe distance and thick glass between us. My right leg still goes numb sometimes when the weather changes, and the tips of my fingers have lost their former sensitivity, but that is a small price to pay for the right to breathe. The hardest part after my rescue wasn't the pain or the surgeries. The hardest part was the return to normalcy. When you have been to the place where time is measured by each subsequent breath, ordinary life feels strangely noisy and empty. For the first few weeks in the city, I couldn't stand the sound of a working air conditioner. It reminded me of the whistle of that same wind in the canyon. I couldn't look at ice in a glass of water. To everyone else, ice was just a way to cool a drink. To me, it was the element that nearly swallowed my soul. I remember my first visit to a supermarket after the hospital. I stood in front of the bread shelf and felt something akin to a panic attack. The overwhelming choice, dozens of varieties, the bright fluorescent lights, it all seemed so misplaced. Back in that snow burrow, I had dreamed of a crumb of a frozen energy bar as if it were the ultimate reward. And here, people passed by, preoccupied with petty problems, not noticing what a miracle it is simply to be in the warmth. My Hasselblad, the very camera that served as my shovel and my beacon, now sits on a shelf in my office. The rescuers found it next to me. It is battered, the lens is cracked, and the body is scarred by Alaskan rock. I decided not to have it repaired. This mangled piece of technology is my visual proof that even the most expensive things only have value when they help you survive. Recently, I got a call from the same rescuer who descended for me on the hoist. His name is David. It turns out he also remembers that night from time to time. "You know, Max," he told me over the phone, "we pull a lot of people off those mountains, but few look at us the way you did. Most are just terrified. You, however, looked like you had understood something." And he was right. I understood that we live in an illusion of control. We think we are the masters of this world because we have GPS, heating, and the internet. But it only takes one button being switched off for you to find yourself face to face with the primordial darkness once again. I no longer chase the perfect shot for magazines. Now, I photograph people. I look for that same spark in their eyes that I tried to see in myself that night. Because true beauty isn't found in snow-capped peaks or sunsets over the ocean. True beauty is the will that forces a person to take one more step when their legs can no longer move. Tonight, I will go out onto the terrace again. I will take a cup of hot tea, real tea, with lemon, the kind I raved about in my hallucinations. I will watch as the twilight slowly swallows the Chugach Range. I know that out there, the wind is whistling again, and the temperature is dropping to lethal levels. I respect those mountains. I love them. But now I know their secret. They aren't evil. They are simply waiting for those who have forgotten what it means to be alive. I take a sip of tea and feel the warmth spreading through my body. It is the best feeling in the world. Just to feel the warmth. Just to know that tomorrow the sun will rise again.